Dr. Sarah Chen never expected her expertise in deep-sea biology would make her a diplomatic incident waiting to happen. Yet here she was, standing in the pristine white halls of the Galactic Fitness Institute, trying not to fidget as three spindly aliens examined her with what appeared to be grave concern. You routinely conduct research at depths of 300 atmospheres. The lead examiner, whose name translated roughly to wavelength of sunset, managed to make the question sound like an admission of insanity. Their bioluminescent patches pulsed with skepticism. "Well, yes," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "In a submersible, of course. Though our diving suits can handle about 30 atmospheres for short periods." She decided not to mention the experimental suits she'd been testing that could go even deeper. No need to give them collective cardiac events, assuming they had hearts. The trio of examiners huddled together, their translucent membranes rippling in what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of vigorous debate. The Institute's stark lighting made their naturally iridescent bodies shimmer like soap bubbles. Beautiful, but she'd quickly learned that their delicate appearance matched their equally delicate technological assumptions. "Dr. Chen," Wavelength finally spoke, "according to our records, your species evolved on a heavy gravity world with extreme pressure variations and toxic levels of oxidizing agents in the atmosphere. They managed to make Earth sound like a death trap, yet you claim no biological augmentations." Sarah suppressed a sigh. This was her third day of evaluation, and they still couldn't quite believe she was unmodified. None at all. Just standard human biology. "We're pretty sturdy by default." "Fascinating. Disturbing, but fascinating." The second examiner, Crystal Song in Wind, floated closer. Their sensor array hummed as it took yet another reading of Sarah's vital signs. "And you volunteered for deep-sea research, willingly seeking out high-pressure environments. Someone has to study the life down there." Sarah shrugged, then immediately regretted the motion as all three aliens flinched back. "Right. Quick movements. Still scary. Sorry. But yes, Earth's oceans are full of undiscovered species. It's exciting work." The third examiner, who hadn't yet shared their name, made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. The human shows no signs of stress discussing these conditions. "Remarkable. Perhaps we should proceed with the practical evaluation." Sarah brightened at that. "Finally, something besides questions and scans. What kind of evaluation did you have in mind?" The examiners led her through a series of corridors, each one filled with increasingly complex equipment. Most of it seemed designed for species that evolved in much gentler conditions than Earth. Sarah noticed more than a few warning labels about pressure tolerances that made her want to laugh. She'd worn tougher equipment for weekend dives. They arrived at what appeared to be a testing chamber. The walls were made of some crystalline material that somehow managed to look both incredibly strong and impossibly delicate. Various pieces of monitoring equipment floated in precisely arranged patterns throughout the space. "This is our primary assessment facility," Wavelength explained. "We use it to evaluate species' adaptability to various environmental conditions. Given your unique background, we'll start with basic pressure tolerance tests." Sarah nodded, trying to look appropriately serious. She'd read the briefing materials. The Institute served as a certification center for various species seeking to work in extreme conditions. What they considered extreme, however, was rather different from human standards. "Please step into the chamber." Crystal Song gestured with one gossamer appendage. "We'll begin with one standard atmosphere and increase gradually. Please inform us immediately if you experience any discomfort." Sarah complied, settling into what appeared to be an observation pod. The material was surprisingly comfortable, adapting to her form like memory foam. As the chamber sealed, she could hear the soft hum of equipment powering up. "Beginning test sequence," the unnamed examiner announced. "1 standard atmosphere. 2. 3. Sarah relaxed, barely noticing the pressure changes. This was nothing compared to her work in the Mariana Trench. She watched with growing amusement as the examiner's bioluminescence patterns grew increasingly agitated. 10 standard atmospheres, Wavelength announced, their voice tight with concern. Dr. Chen, your vital signs are stable. How do you feel? Fine, Sarah replied honestly. This is about what I experienced getting into the pool at our research facility. Should I be feeling something? The examiner's huddle this time looked less like a debate and more like barely contained panic. Their translucent bodies were practically strobing with agitation. The human shows no signs of strain, Crystal Song reported, their voice somewhere between awe and horror. Respiratory function normal. Cardiovascular system stable. This exceeds our equipment's predicted tolerance models. Sarah was about to respond when a sharp crack echoed through the chamber. A thin line appeared in one of the crystalline walls, spreading like ice on a spring pond. Shutdown sequence, Wavelength commanded. Emergency protocols. The pressure began to decrease, but Sarah could see the crack continuing to spread. Without thinking, she braced herself against the weakening section, using her body to reinforce it. The examiner's bioluminescence nearly went nova. Please remain calm, Sarah called out, holding steady. The structural integrity is compromised, but I can maintain this position until you get the pressure equalized. Maybe we should discuss equipment specifications before the next test. As alarms blared and emergency teams rushed in, Sarah couldn't help but smile. First contact situations were always tricky, but this had to be a first, breaking alien testing equipment by simply being human. She had a feeling her research exchange program was about to become a lot more interesting than anyone had anticipated. The Institute's emergency repair crews had worked through 3 shift cycles to reinforce the testing chamber. Sarah watched from an observation platform as they applied layer after layer of some iridescent material that looked like liquid diamond. She'd spent those cycles writing reports, explaining human physiology, and trying to convince increasingly agitated alien scientists that no, she really wasn't augmented. We have adjusted the parameters, Wavelength announced, their bioluminescent patches still pulsing with nervous energy. The chamber is now rated for 50 standard atmospheres. Though I must stress, Dr. Chen, this exceeds all safety protocols established in the Institute's history. Sarah nodded, reviewing the holographic readouts floating before her. And you're sure you want to proceed with the aquatic simulation? After yesterday's incident, Crystal Song in Wind drifted closer, their sensor arrays humming. Your species' adaptation to liquid immersion is relevant to our research, though the concept remains disturbing. Just wait until I tell you about surfing, Sarah muttered under her breath, then louder, shall we begin? The new chamber was larger, its walls noticeably thicker. As Sarah stepped inside, she noticed additional reinforcement bands crisscrossing the structure. The observation pod had been replaced with what looked like a small pool of perfectly clear liquid. This is a synthetic environment medium, the still unnamed third examiner explained. Similar to your planet's dihydrogen monoxide, but with enhanced monitoring capabilities. You mean water? Sarah couldn't help smiling. You can just call it water. The examiner's collective shudder made ripples in their translucent forms. Yes, that. Please enter when ready. Sarah slipped into the pool, immediately noticing the difference. The liquid was denser than water, with an almost syrupy consistency. Her movement created strange patterns of refraction, casting prismatic shadows on the chamber walls. Beginning pressure increase, Wavelength announced, introducing simulated depth conditions. The pressure built gradually, but Sarah could tell something was different. This felt more like her deep-sea dives, the weight of phantom oceans pressing in from all sides. Her body adjusted automatically, years of training kicking in. 20 atmospheres, Crystal Song reported. Subject shows normal adaptation patterns. Wait. Their sensor arrays flared. Are you exercising? Sarah paused her underwater stretches. Sorry, force of habit. This reminds me of our training pools, though the visibility is much better. The examiner's data streams became a chaos of flashing symbols. You conduct physical training under these conditions. Voluntarily. Well, yes. You have to stay in shape for deep-sea work. The currents can be pretty strong at depth. Sarah demonstrated with a few powerful strokes through the liquid, creating complex vortices that set the monitoring equipment spinning. Fascinating, the unnamed examiner whispered. The human's muscular efficiency actually increases under pressure. The liquid resistance seems to provide optimal conditions for their movement patterns. Sarah was about to explain about hydrodynamics when she noticed something odd. The prismatic patterns on the walls were shifting, forming concentric rings that pulsed outward from her position. The synthetic liquid began to feel warmer, more viscous. Is it supposed to be doing that?" she asked, watching as the patterns grew more intense. "Impossible." Wavelength's voice had risen an octave. "The medium is responding to your bioelectric field. It's becoming molecularly excited. The pressure parameters are destabilizing." Sarah felt the change immediately. The liquid was no longer just dense. It was beginning to structure itself, forming crystal-like lattices around her limbs. The beautiful patterns on the walls had become a strobing cascade of light. "Emergency shutdown," Crystal Song called out. "The field containment is." The rest was lost as the liquid suddenly illuminated from within, responding to Sarah's own electrical impulses. She found herself suspended in a network of crystalline structures, each one amplifying and reflecting her body's natural energy. "Don't move," Wavelength commanded. "The molecular matrix is completely destabilized. One wrong movement could shatter the entire containment system." Sarah held perfectly still, feeling the strange resonance between her body and the transformed liquid. "I don't mean to add to the panic," she said carefully, "but I think it's responding to my nerve impulses. Every time my heart beats, the crystals pulse." The examiner's data streams had become a solid wall of emergency indicators. Yet Sarah noticed something else. Other aliens had begun gathering at the observation windows. Their expressions, while hard to read, showed something beyond fear or concern. Was that excitement? Dr. Chen, the unnamed examiner's voice held a new tone, something like wonder. "I believe we may need to reconsider our entire approach. Your species' interaction with pressure environments appears to be far more complex than mere tolerance." Sarah watched as the crystalline structures continued to grow, creating a delicate lattice that somehow felt like an extension of her own nervous system. "I think," she said slowly, "we're going to need a bigger testing chamber." Through the prismatic maze surrounding her, she could see more scientists arriving, their instruments and data pads at ready. What had started as a simple pressure test had just opened up an entirely new field of xenobiology. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, if this was how aliens reacted to basic human capabilities, how would they handle learning about extreme sports? The Institute had never been so crowded. Word had spread about the pressure-wielding human, faster than light through the galactic scientific community. Sarah found herself at the center of what felt like an interstellar conference, with holographic observers from a dozen worlds hovering around the reinforced chamber. "Please understand," a new examiner, whose name translated as Quantum Ripple, addressed the assembled audience. "What we're witnessing is unprecedented. The human's natural bioelectric field creates harmonic resonances with pressurized environments at a molecular level." Sarah stood beside the latest version of the testing chamber, now reinforced with exotic materials she couldn't even pronounce. She'd given up trying to convince them that deep-sea diving wasn't actually magic. Their instruments kept insisting otherwise. "If I may," interrupted a crystalline being whose light-refracting body reminded Sarah of a diamond prism. "The implications for deep space construction are staggering. If human biological patterns can stabilize molecular matrices under extreme pressure, we're getting ahead of ourselves." Wavelength cut in, their bioluminescence flickering with concern. "Dr. Chen has agreed to one final test series, but the risks are acceptable," Sarah finished. "Though I still think you're overcomplicating things. Humans have been diving deep for centuries." The assembled scientists rippled with various expressions of disbelief, their diverse physiologies creating a wave of motion through the observation area. The new chamber hummed with power, its walls gleaming with layers of theoretical physics Sarah could barely comprehend. "We've modified the synthetic environment," Crystal Song explained, their sensor arrays extended to maximum sensitivity. "This time, we'll attempt to replicate conditions found in gas giant atmospheric layers. The pressure gradients will be extreme." Sarah nodded, checking the seals on her testing suit. They'd insisted she wear it this time, though she suspected it was more for the sensors than protection. "Just remember, if anything starts crystallizing again, I need room to move." That lattice formation from last time was getting a bit cramped. The chamber door sealed with a sound like distant thunder. The synthetic environment, now a swirling mix of colors that reminded Sarah of Jupiter's clouds, began to fill the space. She felt the familiar embrace of pressure, but something was different. The liquid seemed to sing, creating harmonics she could feel in her bones. "Beginning gradient increase," Quantum Ripple announced. "Current depth simulation equivalent to 1 kilometer in a gas giant's atmosphere." Sarah moved through the environment, feeling the strange currents swirl around her. The liquid responded to her presence, creating spiral patterns that matched her motion. "The density feels different," she reported. "More like a plasma than liquid." 2 kilometers, Crystal Song called out. "Human vital signs, strengthening. That can't be right." They were right. Sarah felt energized. The pressure wasn't fighting her, it was working with her, as if the very molecules of the testing medium were aligning with her body's natural rhythms. The swirling colors began to pulse in time with her heartbeat. 3 kilometers. 4. 5. Wavelength's voice held a note of awe. "The harmonic resonance is approaching theoretical limits." The chamber walls seemed to flex, not from strain, but as if they were breathing. The assembled scientists pressed closer to their observation points, instruments recording everything. Sarah felt like she was conducting an orchestra of pressure and energy, each movement creating new patterns in the swirling medium. Then she heard it, a sound like crystal chimes rising in pitch. The liquid around her began to glow, not with the previous test's crystalline structures, but with something deeper. Patterns of light and shadow danced through the chamber, forming complex geometries that shouldn't have been possible. "The molecular harmonics are cascading." Quantum Ripple's voice cut through the rising tone. "The human's bioelectric field is creating a self-sustaining resonance pattern." Sarah felt the change immediately. The environment wasn't just responding to her anymore, it was amplifying her. Each heartbeat sent waves of energy through the chamber. Each breath created new currents of impossible physics. The walls of the chamber began to sing in harmony with the liquid's resonance. "Shutdown procedures aren't responding," Crystal Song reported, their usual calm shattered. "The harmonics are feeding back through our control systems." "Don't shut it down," the crystalline observer suddenly interjected. "Look at the pattern formation. It's stabilizing. The human is actually controlling the molecular cascade." They were right. Sarah found she could direct the flow of energy with subtle movements, like conducting an orchestra of atoms. The chamber had become a sphere of swirling light and pressure, but instead of destroying the containment, it was reinforcing it. "This is impossible," Wavelength whispered, their bioluminescence pulsing in rhythm with the chamber's harmonics. "You're not just tolerating the pressure, you're shaping it, using it. No species has ever." The revelation was interrupted by a sharp crack, not from the chamber, but from somewhere deep in the Institute's structure. The harmonics had spread beyond the testing area, setting up resonance patterns through the entire facility. The main support columns, Quantum Ripple's voice held barely contained panic. "The harmonic feedback is affecting the building's molecular structure." Sarah felt the shift in vibration. The beautiful patterns were becoming dangerous, spreading like ripples in a pond. But as she prepared for emergency evacuation, she realized something. She could feel the building's rhythms just as she felt the test chambers. And if human biology could affect molecular structures, "I have an idea," she called out, already adjusting her position in the swirling energy field. "But you're probably not going to like it." The crystalline observer's facets caught the light of the chamber's swirling energies. "At this point, Dr. Chen, I believe you've earned the right to surprise us." Sarah smiled, feeling the pulse of pressure and possibility around her. "Well, since you mentioned deep space construction." She took a deep breath, reaching out to the singing atoms around her. "Let me show you what humans can really do with a little pressure." The chamber erupted with light as Sarah began the most unusual engineering project in human history, using nothing but pressure, physics, and the peculiar properties of Earth-evolved biology to reshape alien architecture at the molecular level. The gathered scientists were about to learn that when it came to humans, breaking points were just the beginning. The aftermath of Sarah's molecular manipulation had transformed the Institute in more ways than one. The main structure, now reinforced with human-harmonized crystalline matrices, gleamed with subtle patterns that pulsed in time with the facility's power grid. But more striking was the change in the scientists themselves. Their fear of human capabilities had been replaced by intense curiosity. "The applications are remarkable," Quantum Ripple was saying, leading a tour group through the modified sections. "The human-induced molecular harmonics have improved structural integrity by 300%. We're detecting similar enhancements in our environmental systems, power distribution." The facility's lights suddenly flickered, cutting off their explanation. A low vibration ran through the floor, different from the usual harmonic hum. "Status report," Wavelength commanded, their bioluminescence shifting to emergency frequencies. Crystal Song's sensor arrays spun in agitation. "The primary containment field in Research Block 7 is destabilizing. Some kind of cascade failure in the pressure regulation systems." Sarah felt it before the alarm started. A discordant note in the building's usual symphony of pressures and forces. "What's in Block 7? The unnamed examiner's translucent form rippled with distress. "The Deep Space Anomaly Research Lab. They're studying a fragment of something found in the gravity well of a collapsed star." Another tremor, stronger this time. The reinforced walls groaned under sudden stress. Evacuation protocols initiated. An automated voice announced, "Warning. Containment failure imminent in Research Block 7. Warning. Gravitational anomalies detected." Sarah watched as the assembled aliens began their emergency procedures, their movements precise but urgent. Yet something wasn't right. The vibrations were intensifying too quickly, the pressure waves feeling less like failure and more like, "It's not failing," she realized aloud. "It's adapting. Whatever's in there is learning from the containment field's frequency." Quantum Ripple's sensor arrays froze. "Impossible. The fragment is inert matter. It couldn't." The next tremor knocked several scientists off their feet. Through the facility's crystalline walls, Sarah could see distortions spreading from Block 7. Space itself seemed to be warping. "The fragment is generating its own gravity well," Crystal Song reported, their voice tight with fear. "Containment systems at 12% and falling. At this rate, the collapse will tear the station apart." Sarah felt the competing pressures building, the facility's normal harmonics fighting against this new chaotic force. But there was something familiar in the chaos, a pattern she recognized from her deep-sea research. "It's like a underwater pressure vortex," she muttered, mind racing. "When currents collide at different depths." She turned to Wavelength. "I need to get to Block 7. "Absolutely not." The examiner's bioluminescence flashed warning patterns. "The gravitational distortions alone would crush most species." Sarah smiled grimly. "Good thing I'm not most species. Look, I can feel the pressure patterns. They're similar to what we created in the test chamber, just inverted. If I can get close enough to establish a harmonic counterpoint." "You want to try resonating with an object from a collapsed star." Quantum Ripple's voice hit frequencies Sarah hadn't known were possible. "The energy requirements alone would be about what a human body produces naturally." Sarah finished. "You've seen what our bioelectric field can do." Let me try. Another tremor rocked the facility. Through the windows, Sarah could see evacuation ships launching, their drives struggling against the growing gravitational distortions. Crystal Song's sensors whirled in rapid calculation. Containment at 8%. We have perhaps 3 minutes before total failure. Get everyone out, Sarah ordered, already moving toward Block 7. I'll need space to work, and if this goes wrong, she managed a small smile. Well, let's just say the pressure test records might need updating. The corridor to Block 7 was already beginning to distort, its crystalline walls bending in ways that ignored geometry. Sarah could feel the competing forces growing stronger with each step, the facility's harmonics fighting against the fragment's chaotic gravity. Containment at 5%, Crystal Song's voice crackled through her communicator. Dr. Chen, whatever you're planning. Already on it, Sarah replied, reaching the sealed doors of Block 7. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the fragment, a piece of darkness that seemed to pull at reality itself. The containment field around it was visible now, a failing lattice of energy trying to hold back the impossible. Sarah placed her hands on the chamber walls, feeling the molecular song of the structure. Just like in the test chamber, but this time she wasn't trying to control the pressure. She needed to become part of it. Containment at 3%, the automated system announced. Critical failure imminent. Sarah closed her eyes, reaching out with senses she'd never known she had before coming to the Institute. The fragment's gravity pulled at her, but instead of fighting it, she let herself feel its rhythm. There was a pattern there, hidden in the chaos, like the deep ocean currents she'd studied for years. 2%. The wall under her hands began to crystallize, responding to her bioelectric field. But this time, Sarah pushed further, letting the crystallization spread through her, turning her entire body into a resonance chamber. 1%. The fragment's gravity slammed into her like a physical force. Sarah gritted her teeth, remembering the pressure at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the weight of an ocean. This was just another kind of pressure, another dance with the fundamental forces that had shaped her species. Containment failure in 10, 9. Sarah opened herself to the pressure, became one with it. Her heartbeat synchronized with the fragment's pulses, her nervous system matching its gravitational frequencies. The crystalline structures around her began to pulse, not fighting the fragment's power but channeling it, redirecting it. 3, 2. The countdown never reached 1. The fragment's chaotic energies met the ordered harmonics of human biology, and in that meeting, something new was born. The walls of Block 7 filled with light, complex patterns of force and resonance, spreading outward like ripples in a cosmic pond. Sarah felt the moment of balance, the perfect harmony between human-generated order and stellar chaos. Through the crystalline network that now connected her to the facility systems, she could sense the gravitational distortions settling, the fragment's power becoming part of the station's own harmonics. Containment stabilize, the automated system announced, sounding almost surprised. Gravitational anomalies normalizing. New containment matrix detected. Analyzing. Sarah allowed herself a small laugh, even as she maintained the delicate balance of forces. You know, she said to whoever might still be listening, I think we might need to revise those equipment specifications again. Through the facility's crystalline walls, she could see the evacuation ships returning, their crews no doubt wondering what impossible thing the human had done this time. But Sarah was already thinking ahead, her scientist's mind racing with the implications. If human biology could stabilize stellar fragments, well, she thought, watching the fragment pulse in time with her heartbeat, maybe those deep space construction projects weren't such a far-fetched idea after all. 6 months after the Block 7 incident, the Galactic Fitness Institute had become unrecognizable. The crystalline architecture now pulsed with living light, its molecular structure permanently altered by the merger of human harmonics and alien technology. But the physical changes paled in comparison to the scientific revolution unfolding within its walls. Sarah stood in what had once been the original testing chamber, now transformed into the heart of the new Human Harmonics Research Division. Around her, aliens of various species worked at stations designed to study and harness the unique properties of human biology. The latest deep space construction project was a complete success. Quantum Ripple reported, their form shimmering with excitement. The human harmonic reinforced hull maintained structural integrity, even within the gas giant's upper atmosphere. The mining operation can begin 2 years ahead of schedule, and the medical applications continue to exceed expectations. Crystal Song added, their sensor arrays scanning a holographic display of cellular structures. The pressure harmonic therapy has shown remarkable results in treating species previously thought incompatible with high-gravity environments. Sarah nodded, watching as a team of researchers studied the contained stellar fragment, now a stable part of the Institute's power grid. Its chaotic energies, once nearly destructive, had become a controlled source of gravitational manipulation under the influence of human-generated harmonics. To think, Wavelength mused, their bioluminescence creating complex patterns in the air. We once considered Earth's conditions to be hostile to life. Now we understand that those very pressures created something extraordinary. We're not extraordinary, Sarah corrected gently. We're just adapted to our environment, like any other species. We just happened to evolve in conditions that turned out to be surprisingly useful. The unnamed examiner, who had finally shared their name as Resonance Between Stars, drifted forward. Perhaps that is the extraordinary part, Dr. Chen. Your species not only survived what we considered impossible conditions, you learned to thrive in them, to harness them in ways we never imagined possible. A group of new human scientists passed by, recently arrived to join the expanding research program. Sarah smiled, remembering her own first days at the Institute. Now these newcomers would help push the boundaries even further, combining human pressure tolerance with alien technology in ways that were transforming galactic society. The Council has approved the establishment of the first Human Harmonics Academy, Quantum Ripple announced. We've already received applications from over 300 worlds. It seems everyone wants to learn how to work with human-generated pressure fields. And the deep space exploration teams? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. The news had been causing excitement throughout the scientific community. Crystal Song's sensors spun, and what Sarah had learned was their expression of joy. The first joint mission launches next month. A human-alien crew, using harmonically reinforced ships, will attempt to study phenomena we never dared approach before. Black holes, neutron stars, the infinite possibilities of pressure and void. Resonance Between Stars added poetically. Together. Sarah turned to watch a demonstration in the corner of the lab, where a human researcher was teaching a group of alien scientists the basics of pressure manipulation. Their bodies were surrounded by swirling patterns of light as they learned to synchronize their various biological rhythms with human harmonics. You know what still amazes me, she said, more to herself than her colleagues. All of this started because you wanted to make sure I could handle alien environments safely. Turns out we were asking the wrong question all along. Indeed, Wavelength agreed, their color shifting to thoughtful hues. We should not have asked if humans could adapt to our environments, but rather what our environments could become when shaped by human capabilities. Through the crystalline walls, Sarah could see ships arriving from across the galaxy, each bringing new researchers, new questions, new possibilities. The Institute had become more than a testing facility. It was now a symbol of what could happen when different species truly learned from each other. The stellar fragment's containment field is due for its monthly harmonic adjustment. Resonance Between Stars reminded her. Would you care to demonstrate the technique for our new arrivals? Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar pulse of pressure and possibility around her. Why not? After all, they should learn that the most important thing about human pressure tolerance isn't our strength or endurance. Oh, Crystal Song's sensors tilted curiously. What would you say is most important? Sarah stepped toward the fragment's chamber, already feeling the resonance building between her bioelectric field and the crystalline structures around her. That we never stop trying to understand it, adapt it, and share what we learn. Because in the end, that's the real human strength, not just surviving pressure, but learning to dance with it. As she began the harmonic adjustment, the chamber filling with patterns of light and force that moved like ocean currents through space, Sarah thought about how far they'd come. From breaking testing equipment to breaking paradigms, from fear to fascination, from isolation to integration. The fragment pulsed in sync with her heartbeat, its stellar energies now part of a greater harmony. Around her, aliens and humans worked together, each bringing their unique perspectives to the endless dance of pressure and possibility. And somewhere out there, in the depths of space, new discoveries waited, not just for humans, not just for aliens, but for all of them together. After all, Sarah thought as she conducted her symphony of forces, pressure wasn't just about resistance or strength. It was about adaptation, understanding, and growth. And in that, perhaps, lay the greatest lesson of all, that the true measure of any species wasn't in how much pressure they could withstand, but in how they chose to use that pressure to reach for the stars.